I'll be the oversight. We're going to make good deals. We make good deals.
The president talking there about the trillions of dollars in stimulus money that the government is shoveling into the economy. And judging by the way things are going, it seems right now that he probably is the principal watchdog. Now, we've had large organizations like Los Angeles Lakers, Ruth Chris Steakhouse, just to give a couple examples, who've gotten millions of dollars only to end up returning it. And now we're also learning that tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans are tucked into the program. And I want to quote here from a piece in the Times that explains the situation. Some of the breaks apply to taxes that have long been in the crosshairs of corporate lobbyists. They undo limitations that were imposed to rein in the giveaways embedded in a $1.5 trillion tax cut package enacted in 2017. None specifically target businesses or individuals harmed by the coronavirus. And that's not all. Times also investigating how several companies with dicey track records also got money. Headline, well, it says it all. Large troubled companies got bailout money in small business loan program. Companies with accounting problems or in trouble with the government received millions in federal loans. My next guest, he is on the byline of both of the pieces I just mentioned. Jesse Drucker, an investigative reporter with the business desk of the New York Times. Jesse, thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's first jump into the small business loan program, because as I understand it, this was meant for companies that couldn't make basically their nut. They couldn't finance this without the help of the federal government. And the thinking is these were people directly impacted by the pandemic. But it seems from your reporting that neither of those two conditions seem to be a requirement for who gets the money.
Right. I mean, one of the issues with the way this is all being administered is it's essentially being done, not essentially, it's being done through banks. And so what that means is that the people who are going to be able to get the loans most quickly are the ones that have existing significant banking relationships with big banks. And so, kind of the corner bodega or grocery store that you might think of as being in need because it's been closed for the last 6 weeks, those folks probably don't have multi-million-dollar credit facilities with the country's biggest banks. And so instead of those folks getting the first slug of loans, we're seeing companies that are not, for the most part, not the household names like Shake Shack or Google or Goldman Sachs, but are companies that report potentially tens of millions of dollars a year in revenue, have existing relationships with big banks, and those banks are the ones that are responsible for giving out these loans.
Jesse, did you find from your reporting that it was, once the SBA basically outsourced it to these banks, those that got the loans, while so many small business have basically been left on the sidelines, is it because they just knew how to get to the front of the line here? Or is it because the banks gave them preferential treatment because they had previous relationships? I mean, you also go on to say that coincidentally or not, some Trump donors, they certainly enjoyed some of the benefits for this when obviously other folks didn't.
Well, I mean, parts of this are speculative, but I mean, the part that we don't have to speculate about is simply, I think the original issue or the main problem here is that it is a government program that is being administered by banks. And so if you're a bank, who are you more likely to listen to? A company with whom you have a multi-year, multi-million-dollar banking relationship, or some company that you've never heard of? And I think for especially companies that don't have those existing relationships, I think a lot of them didn't even know where to turn. We've heard stories of companies or really of small businesses, restaurant owners, bar owners who have turned to the SBA for help, and the SBA directs them to banks, and they don't have relationships with the banks that are doing this.
Part of the infuriating elements that I got from this is you have companies that literally had to pay fines to the federal government and then get loans, while other people that are far more needy and you would argue deserving aren't getting a shot, and they're getting loans in excess of the fines they're paying. Then you're finding other people who are getting millions in loans only to give seven-figure bonuses in terms of pay packages, at least to corporate executives, and others are using the loans they're getting here just to go buy other businesses or rival firms, and they've already stated they don't even need the money. It just seems that nobody's minding the store.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can assume that for this kind of first few weeks of this process, you're going to see a lot of stuff like that. And it's possible that Congress or Treasury will come in and add some additional teeth so that there actually will be something in the form of not just oversight, but perhaps more qualifications beyond the kind of bare bones qualifications that we have so far.
I don't know. Maybe that faith in Congress is misplaced. Your reporting shows that what's buried inside the latest relief packages in terms of tax cuts from the wealthiest of the wealthy.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, basically, if you want to kind of step back for a second, one way to look at this is that in 2017, Congress passed and Donald Trump signed the biggest change to the country's tax laws in 30 years. And those basically consisted of trillions of dollars of tax breaks, largely to big companies and to wealthier people. And that was combined with some givebacks, some new taxes, some restrictions on deductions that companies have been able to take to help mitigate the cost of the final package. It was still on net a $1.5 trillion tax cut. And now what we've seen happen over the last couple of years is first the Treasury Department, through its regulations process, has gradually whittled away the potency of some of those new taxes, particularly the taxes on multinational companies and some of the profits they claim to earn offshore. And now what we're seeing in the stimulus package is there are three big tax cuts in there that exclusively benefit wealthy people or bigger companies. Congress chose tax breaks taken from a menu that was essentially written by corporate tax lobbyists over the last 2 years. And in one case, one of the tax breaks, which will cost the government $135 billion over the next decade, you are only eligible for that break if you are a household, if you're a married couple earning at least $500,000 a year, which makes you one of the top 1% taxpayers in the country. That break only affects those people. And so the thing that's interesting about that is it's not a break that disproportionately favors wealthy people. It's only for wealthy people. Only wealthy people will benefit from that at all. But again, I just think the significance of that is that really kind of when you're in a crisis the way we are right now, and you want to figure out how to provide some relief to businesses and to people through the tax code, it's helpful if you have a lobbyist who has basically been laying the foundation over the years for what issues Congress should even think about. And that's kind of what happened here.
It seems, maybe overly simplistic on my part and naive, but it seems that with both of these, given the shared pain that's going on nationally, that there needs to be somebody in charge of oversight right now. We know the Inspector General that got canned right when the first package was put out, but also that there's somebody targeting, and politically I would think it's popular on the Hill to make sure the people most impacted and most in need are getting the help. And then finally, that if you're going to be getting some of this aid, that there's some conditions attached to it, that it's not going to go in these giant pay packages or that it's used to basically, buy back stock or whatever else. To me, Jesse, it just seems not only is it a blank check, but possibly we're going to keep writing blank checks without any strings attached.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. I mean, on the other hand, one could potentially foresee how in the next round, now that there's been so much press about some of these problems in the first round, that maybe there'll be some teeth going forward. But yeah, I mean, look, in terms of like the SBA program, it was basically written where you don't have to pay it back as long as you do X, Y, and Z, like retain a certain percentage of your workforce. But even if you don't do that and you have to pay the money back, you're just getting a very cheap loan. You're getting a loan at 1%, which I think, a lot of companies were thrilled to get.
Absolutely. And as much as you'd think, maybe conscience might step in. I just look at the debate we had today about state aid and what conditions would be attached, and the Senate Majority Leader saying maybe New York and California ought to go bankrupt, but I digress. Jesse, I appreciate a few minutes today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, when we come back, we'll be joined by an ER doctor on the front lines fighting COVID. He'll tell us about some of the new things we're learning, but also how much we still don't know about coronavirus.